Hello and welcome to the VBA Jetpack course by TrumpExcel. I am Sumit Bansal, and in this video we will learn more about Userform and we will see how to create a full-fledged Userform using VBA in Excel. So let's get started. Let me first show you what we are trying to create here. So here I have a button, and if I click on this button it opens this user form. It says add employee details, and here you can enter the employee name, gender, department and the date of joining. And when you click on add details, those details get added here. So let me show you an example. I would type my name here. The gender is already selected. I would select the department as marketing, and let's say the date of joining is 3rd 0302 2014. And now when I click on add details, you can see that it has added this here. It's first the serial number, then the name it picks up from here, gender it picks up from here, the department, and then the date of joining. Now it's easy to bring all these elements together and create this user form as we saw in the previous video, but this form also has some checks in place. So let's say that I have not entered a name here, and if I try and add these details, then it would not let me do it. It would say that this has not been entered. This label becomes red and the cursor comes here, it's blinking, which means that you need to complete this part. Let's say I do this. I type the name here and I type something which is not a date of joining here. So let's say I type some text here, then it would still not let me add it because it would ask for a valid date, and you can see that this label has become red. If I try and go to add details here, it will not add anything. So there are some checks in place where if these text boxes or these selections have not been made or the text has not been entered, then this would not let me go ahead and add those details. So we will see how to create this user form. And again, we have the cancel button here. If you click on cancel, then the user form goes away and nothing gets added here. So to do that, let me open a new workbook and I'll show you how to do this from scratch. Let me close this workbook where we already have the user form made. I would close this. I'll not save it, and here let's work on this workbook, which is book 1. Now the first thing I would do is I would press Alt F11 to get into the VB editor mode, and here I would add the user form. So to add a user form, I would simply right click on any of the objects here, go to insert and then select user form. As soon as I do that, you can see that it has inserted a user form, which is user form 1. I have this user form here. This is where we would be adding the elements, and this is how it would look like. And here we have a toolbox. Just to quickly go through the elements of this toolbox, we have the select objects arrow. We have this label where we have the text such as name or department. We have these text boxes. We have a combo box. We have a list box where you can have a list and you can select multiple items. We have a checkbox, a radio button or an option button. Then we have these toggle buttons. We have this frame where you can have many elements within the frame and it works as a group. We have command buttons. Then we have these tab strips where you can select one item and then it is displayed, and if you click on the other tab, then that is displayed. It's multi-page. Here we have the scroll bar, the spin button, and we can also insert an image. Now in this example we will not be using all these elements, but we would be using a couple of this. We would be using label, text boxes, combo boxes, option buttons, command buttons. So you can play around with these when you have a good hang of how user form and the elements work. Let's get started with building the user form that I just showed you. The first thing that we would do with the user form and with all the elements is that we would first go to the properties section and change the name of the user form. If you do not have the properties window visible, simply go to view and click here, or you can also use the keyboard shortcut F4. Whenever you select an object, you would have the properties displayed for that object. In this case it's the user form, and let me change the name of the user form and make it add details. And you can do a lot of things as we learned in the previous video. You can change the back color, border and everything, but we don't need to change anything here. The only thing I would change is the caption. caption is what you see here. As of now it says user form 1. I would change the caption to add employee details. Now in caption you can have spaces, but here in the name make sure there are no spaces. So if you want to separate these two words, you can use an underscore, but the space should not be there. So now we have this user form. If we quickly run this and I go here and press this button or press F5, you oops so here if I select the user form and I run this user form, you can see that it has nothing. It just says add employee details, and it has no elements. So we would keep on adding those elements, and then we would see how it works. So let's do one thing. Let's add all the elements quickly, because that might take a lot of time. So let's quickly do that. I would add the labels here. So the first thing we do is we change the property, which would be here in this case I would call it LBL name, and the caption here would be enter name colon. Now let's enter the text box here. Let's say this is the text box. We would again go here, change the name to txt name, and the reason I'm changing these is because I would be using these names later in my code to do stuff, and it's easier to refer to these names when you have such a notation. As I mentioned in the previous video, there is a 3-letter notation for all these elements. So for example, if we are talking about labels, then it would be LBL. If you're talking about say text boxes, then it's TXT. So let's quickly add these elements. I would come here. Okay, so there is no caption in this case. Let's again enter a label. Here we would I double click on this and it opened the code window for that element. We'll see how it works. Let me go back. I would change this to LBL gender, and here the caption would be gender, maybe colon. And now here I need to insert an option button, because we saw in the user form there were 2 options, male and female. So let's quickly change the properties for this as well. We would call this OPT male, and here the caption would be male, and I can change this. Now one more thing that you need to do either with this option or with the female option button is that you need to make sure that whenever the user form opens, there is one of these is selected by default. So if say the user form opens and none of it is selected, then you would again have to put in a check where the user at least selects one. So let's do one thing. In most of the user forms you would see that one of the options is pre-selected. So to do that, you can come down and here you can change the value to true, and you'll have to manually type this. And now when I make this true, you can see this is selected. Now I can simply insert another option button here. I would go to the properties window, change this to OPT female, and the caption here would be female. And let's resize this as well, and we'll do all the formatting later, because formatting is something that we are not focusing in this video on formatting. It's more about how these elements come together. Now the third thing is again a label. Here we would call this LBL DEPT, the short form for department, and the caption here would be department, maybe a colon. Now in this case we would have to insert a combo box, because we saw that there was a drop down list there. Now in this combo box, let's first change the name. We would call this CMB DEPT, which is for department, and now we need to enter a named range here, which would then show us those values. So either we enter those values or we enter a named range. What we would do is I would go back here, I would go to sheet 2, and here I would type all those departments. So let's say it's marketing, sales, HR, operations, and let's say research. So let's say these are those departments, and I would name it. So let's say I would create a named range. I would come here to the name box and I would say departments. Now if I select this, you can, oops, it has not been made. Let me make it. I'll call this departments. Now let me cross check. I would press Control oops, I would press Control F3, and yes, I have a name range which is called departments. Now I would go back to the user form. Let me press Alt F11, and here I would have to type that here in row source. So I would type the name departments, and now when I come here, you can see that I have this drop down where I have all those options that all those values that I put in the workbook. So this is how you can link a combo box with a named range or with a range of cells there in the workbook. So we have this thing here, we have already named the combo box, and the final element is the date. So I would come here, I would enter a label which would say, let's first rename this to LBL DOJ, which is date of joining, and the caption here would be date of joining and colon. And now finally we would have a text box here, so we will call this text box TXT DOJ. And now you have almost all the elements here. Two things that remain are the buttons. The first button would be add details and the second button would be close. So to add those buttons, we have something called as command button here. We can get the command button here, and you can change the size of this user form. It's a good idea to conserve space and put it in as limited space as possible, but don't over clutter your user form. It's okay to have some space available. And now here I would call this CMD add details, CMD for command button, and then add details. And again we would have to change the caption here, so we would say add details. And similarly we would insert another button here which would be for close. So we would come here, we would say CMD close, and then we would come down here to caption and we would call this close. Now we have all the elements here. Let's quickly align these, and let's quickly do some formatting. So would align all these to the left, maybe bring this a bit here. Let's align these together. So first of all, let's select these, and I'll show you some formatting options that are available. If you go to format, you can size it to fit, or you can make it of the same size. So for example, if I select two options here, then I can come here and I can say make it of the same size in terms of width. So I would select all these options and I would say make it of the same size width. Similarly, I can select these three, I can come here and I can say make it of the same size, and you can see that the size is same. I can align these to the left. So we have these things. Again, you can align these. Let's go back to formatting, align middle. Same thing for all these options as well. In date of joining as well. So here we align these to the middle, and we can move these a bit if you want, but overall this looks pretty neat to me. If you want, you can change the size here so that your user form is a bit less in width, so you can do this. But overall this user form looks good. Again, we're not focusing a lot on formatting, but let's see what happens when we run this user form. So I click the user form and I run this, and when I do that, it opens this user form here. It says add employee details. We have enter name, we have the gender option, department, and the date of joining, and then we have add details and close. So the user form is all made. Now let's go back to the workbook. I would click on this icon or press Alt F11, go to sheet 1, and here I will do one thing. I would have all the titles here. So I would say serial number, then we would have the name, then we would have the gender, then it's department, and then date of joining. And let's give a border to it, and let me give a light color border because this border distracts me a lot. So I would come here, change the line color, and then give this border to it, and let's increase the column widths here, and let me also give a color to it so that the formatting part is complete. Now it looks better. Now let me add one record by myself. I would say this is one. The name could be, let's say, Joe Drake. I'm just making this name. The gender is male, department is, let's say, sales, and the date of joining is, let's say, 01/01/2015. Now what we would do is, we have to have a button here, and when we click on that button, the user form comes up, and then we enter the details in the user form. Then those details gets entered here. So to create that button, and we saw how to do that using two methods. I would show you how to do this using shapes here. I would insert a shape, I would go to edit text and say add details, and I prefer using shapes because shapes are more customizable. You can change the formatting, you can do a lot of stuff, and it's not necessary you need to have this button. You can have a circle, a triangle, or even an image, and you can assign a macro to it. So I have the button ready. Now what I need to do is assign a macro, but before that I need to write the macro. The user form name is add details. I would right click on any of these objects, go to insert module, and here I would write a simple sub. I would say show user form, and I would simply type add details dot show, and this would show the user form. It would it would bring up the user form, and now I would be able to use it. So I have this macro here. I need to assign this macro to this button. This is the macro, and now it's all set. If I click on this, you can see that the user form comes up. Now if I enter something here, if I enter a name here, let's say my name, it is taking all the inputs and everything is there, everything is working. The problem is nothing happens when I go to add details. So if I add details, nothing would happen. Nothing happens if I click on close, because we have created the user form, but these elements don't talk to each other, and we need to make sure that we have the required coding in the backend where these elements would talk to each other. So let's see how to do this. So I would go back to the VB editor to add some code so that this starts working. The first thing that I would do is I would make sure that when I enter a name here, that name gets entered and we have the serial number. So what I need to do is, as soon as I click on add details, it enters a serial number and the name. So let's go back and see how to do this. So I would press Alt F11. It brings me here. I would come to add details. Now what I would do is I need to add a lot of coding to this button, and all these elements have their own coding section, you can say. So for example, if I click on add details, if I double click on this, you can see it opens this code window, and this code window is for this user form. You can see that if I click here, I will have all the elements from the user form. So I have all the command buttons, I have the labels, text, and everything. If you select one of these elements and you go here to the right, you would have all the events for that particular element. So in this case, I've selected, say, command button add details. You have all these elements. Something happens when you click on it, double click on it, enter, error, exit, and all these elements. In this case, I'm only interested in the click event, but all these events primarily work the same way. It's just that something would happen if that event takes place. So if you double click, something would happen, and what would happen is something that you mention here in the code. So here I have the first code, which is private sub cmd add details underscore click, and what I need to do is, as soon as someone clicks on add details, the first thing it should do is it should enter a serial number, and this serial number should be based on what is the serial number right above it. So let's say I have 10 records. I want 11 to get entered in the cell which is the next blank cell. Similarly, if I have, say, 5 records, I want 6 to get entered. So I would use a code, and we have already used it a couple of times in this course, which would be A1, and then I would go down. I would say end Excel down dot offset 1,0, because I want to go to the cell which is the next blank cell. So range A1 dot end Excel down brings you to the last filled cell, dot offset 10 brings you to the next cell which is not filled, and then I would say its value is equal to range A1 dot end Excel down dot value plus 1. Let me bring this here. Now what this would do is, if I simply have this one line code and I go to add details and I click on this button, it would enter 2 here. So let me click on this button, it enters 2 and then 3 and then 4 and 5 and 6 and so on. So this part is taken care of. Now let's move on to the name section. So I would again go back to this code window, and here I would write another line of code, and here I would say range b1 dot end excel down dot offset 1.0 dot value. So we're using the same code, we have just changed the column reference because now it's about column B, and I would say this should be equal to txt name dot value. So whatever text you enter in the text box for the name text box, that value get entered in cell in column B, whichever is the last unfilled cell. So let's see if this works. I come here, I enter my name, and now when I go to add details, it would enter the serial number and it would enter the name here. So this is working. Let me delete this and let's go back again to the code window. Now the second thing I want to do is I want to enter the gender here, which should either be male or female. If I go back to add details, this user form, you can see I have two forms. First, I have two buttons, option buttons, and the first one is male and the second one is female. By default, male is selected. So now let's go back to the code for add details click button, and here the code, the code that I would use is again range c1 dot end excel down dot offset 1,0 dot value is equal to, and now I need to identify whether I have selected male in the option button or female. So there are two things that can be done, and I have to identify which one is selected. So I need to use an if condition for that. So I would use if opt male dot value, and when you select say option button male, then the value for it becomes true. Similarly, if select say opt female, then the value of it becomes true. So whichever radio button is selected, that button's value would be true. In this case, I'm assuming that if this button's value is true, then come here and enter in this cell, enter male. Else, let me copy this, enter female here, and now I would say end if. Now let's see if this works. I come here, I go to add details, I enter my name. Let's say I'll just type my first name, and here I've already selected male, it's pre-selected, and now when I click on add detail, it enters my name and the gender. Now let's close this, let's delete this, and let's try again. This time let's say I type the name as Lisa and I select female here, and now when I click on add details, that name along with the selected gender gets here. So this is working fine. Now the next thing that we need to add is department. So again we would go back, and here it will be very simple. The same thing that we have done here, we would copy this, or let me type it just so that you follow. I would say range D1 because it's in the D column dot end excel down dot offset 1,0 dot value dot value is equal to, now the department is a combo box, so we would not be using txt name, rather we would be using something like cmb dept, which is for department, and we will take this value here, and that's it. If I come here, I again type my name, and I select a department, let's say marketing here, and I add details, it enters the department as well. And now quickly let's also enter the date of joining. So I go back here, and to enter the date of joining, again the same code, range e1 dot end excel down dot offset 1,0 dot value is equal to txt, and here we have two text box. We have already used name, and in this case we want to use date of joining text box. And just to show you how I got this IntelliSense list, if you type something like, say I type txt and I press control spacebar, it gives me the list where I have these names which I declared, which is txt.doj. So in case you have a lot of text boxes, then you can use this trick so that you don't get confused or you don't have to think again and again. You can simply pick the name from here, and I would say txt.doj.value. Now let's see if this is working. So I would run this entire form. Gender is male, department is, let's say, sales, and date of joining is, let's say, 0204 2005, let's say. Then when I go to add details, it enters everything. It enters the serial number, the name, gender, sales, and the date of joining. Now let's check one thing. If I don't enter a name here, and let me delete these details, let me close this first, let me delete these details, and let's see what happens if I do not enter the name here. I've selected, I've entered the gender, it's already pre-selected, and now let's select something here. Let's type the date of joining, and I've not entered a name here. And if I add these details, it adds it. It would add the serial number and the remaining things, but the name is not here. And this is where we need to put in some checks in places. So we need to make sure that this field has been completed, and if it has not been completed, I want to highlight this text in red and bring my cursor here so that the user would know that we need to complete this. And this is usually the case if you have used web-based forms. Similarly, if we have not entered the department or date of joining, then I would want the form to not enable user to add it. It should not add those details. So let's delete this and let's go back and see how we can do this. So I would press Alt F11, and here I would first need to make sure that I have those checks in place, which would again go into the CMD add details code here, which is if I click on add details, it should not add the stuff if everything is not there. So here I would have to put in a couple of checks in place. The first one would be if txt.name.value is equal to blank, then the first thing I want to do is, let's first write end if, and now we will have the code here in between. The first thing I want to do is I want to highlight the label in red. So the label was LBL name dot 4 color, and in case of labels, the font color is the 4 color, is called the 4 color, and we would set this to VB red. And the second thing that we want is that our cursor should move to the text box, and to do that we would again use another method, which would be txt name dot set focus, and this method would bring the cursor in the text.name dialog, in the text name text box, sorry. So let's try and run this, and what would happen is whenever we click on this, it would first check this. If there is something within this text name text box, then this entire thing would not be executed. Otherwise this gets executed, where it would color the label in red and put the cursor in the text box. So let's see if this works. I would enter the department, let's say I enter the date here as well, and I leave this empty. And now when I go and to add details, you can see that it has entered, it has made this red and the focus comes here, but unfortunately it still gets added here. So I need to add another line to my code where I would say exit sub. So now it would do these things and then it would exit this sub, so it would not add these details. Let's try again. I leave this open, I select a department, I type a date, and now when I go to add details, this becomes red, the cursor comes here and nothing is added. So now we would have to put these checks in place for all these elements. So let's now go to the department section, and let's see how we can put a check there. So for the department one, we would again use the same thing. We would say if cmb dept dot value is equal to nothing, then we need to change the label. So we would say label dept dot for color is equal to VB red, and the next thing we would do is we would exit the sub. Since it's not a text box, we cannot set the focus there, but we can exit the sub here and we can say end if. Now let's go back and see if this is working. I click on add details. Here I would enter something, some text here, and I would enter the date. And now when I click on add details, you can see this becomes red. I have to select something before I can enter anything. But if you notice, there is an obvious problem here. If I select, say, sales here, I have selected something, but it still is red. I want this to go back to being black. So let's see how to do that. I would come to add details user form, and here I would double click on this drop down, and when I double click on this, it opens the CMB department underscore change sub here, and we would have to write a code here to check whether a user has selected a value. If he has, then the color should go back to being black. So here I would simply use an if condition. Again, the same thing. I would say if CMB dept dot value is equal to blank, oops, then we need to have then here, then LBL dept dot for color is equal to VB red, else LBL dept dot for color is equal to VB black. And now I would go to end if. What this does is it would check while you are typing, even this sub would be run. So this sub here at the bottom, which is CMD add details underscore click, is executed when you click on the button, but this is executed whenever there is a change in the department drop down. So in this case, say if nothing is selected, the department drop down becomes red, but when you change this, it would again be run, and then it would make it black. So let's see if this happens. I would type some gibberish here. I would, let's say, type the date here, and in the department section I leave it empty. I click on add details, it becomes red, but now when I go back and I select sales, it becomes black here. So this is how I have placed a check where a user would know that he has selected, and this field has been completed, and he can move ahead. Similarly, let me show you an example here as well. I come and I go to add details, this becomes red. Now let me type my name, and while I'm typing my name, I expect this to become black because I've entered something here, but it doesn't happen. So again, to do that, we would do the same thing that we have done here. We would go back to the user form, and here we would double click on this text box. Again, it opens, come here. Okay, here it says text name underscore change. Now we would use the same thing. We would say if txt name dot value is equal to blank, then let me go to the full screen mode. Let me bring this here. Then we would say LBL name dot for color is equal to VB red, else LBL name dot for color is equal to VB black. And now I would go to end if. Now let's see if this code is working the way department code was working. So here I would not enter a name here. I've already selected a gender, and here I would select the department, which is marketing. Now let's say the date of joining is again this 01/01/2015, and I try and add these details. This becomes red, this label becomes red because there is nothing here. But as soon as I start typing, you can see that now it becomes black because we had the text box change sub run the time you are making a change here in this text box. So we have the checks in place for name, we have it for gender because gender is anyway selected, we have it for department. Now let's have a check for date of joining, and we'll do it the same way we did it for every other element. We would come to add details, and here I would double click on this. It opens the text doj underscore change sub here, and we would again use the if condition, and here again I would say if txt doj dot value is equal to blank, oops, then LBL DOJ dot forecolor is equal to VB red, else LBL DOJ dot forecolor is equal to VB black, and I would go to end if. And now when I close this and I come back here, let's just press this add details button, and here when I click on add details, first this becomes red. It says that you have not entered anything here. Let me enter my name. Now I click on add details again, the department label becomes red. I select a department here, I again try and add details, and it gets added here because we have not changed the add details button. So let's go back and quickly do that. So I would go to this button, and here I would have to put in a check for the DOG text box as well. So I would say if txt doj dot value is equal to blank, then LBL doj dot forecolor is equal to VB red, and then I would again put the focus there on the text box for DOJ. So I would say DOJ dot set focus, and then I would say exit sub, then I would say end if. So now let's go back and quickly do this. Let me first delete these details. Here I click on add details, this becomes red. I type Sumit here, then I add details, click here, department becomes red. I select the department, and now when I try and add details here, nothing gets added. This becomes red and the focus comes here. So let's say I type 0101 2015, and now when I click on add details, those details get added here. So we have almost all the checks in place, and you can see that we have created a user form where a user can enter these details, and then unless he has completed the user form or has entered the right details, he cannot add it. The final thing that I want to show you here is that if, let's say, in case of date of joining, I type some gibberish, some random text, and I try and add it, it would still get added, and I don't want this. I want to check whether the user has entered something which is a date or not, and if he has entered a date, then I would allow him to add this. Otherwise I would not want him to add this. So let's go back and see how to do this. So I would press Alt F11, and here I would have to do two things. First is, let's say if I'm entering text, then something needs to check whether it is a date or not, and if it is a date, then it's okay. Otherwise we will have to make the label red in color. So to do that, I already have this condition. I would add another condition just to not make it complicated. I can add multiple conditions to this if as well, but just to not make it complicated, I would add another if condition here, and I would say if is date, and within is date I would put in the value of text doj dot value, and if this is true, which means that if this is a date, then I would say LBL doj dot forecolor should be VB black, because it's okay, it's supposed to be a date and it is. Else LBL doj dot forecolor should be VB red, and I would say end if. Now let's see if this is working. So I come back here, I type some text here, I select the department, and now I start typing something which is not a date, and you can see that this has become red. Now I come back here and I type something which looks like a date, and you can see that when I type 0101, it becomes black, because in Excel, even if you do not enter the year, it would still consider this as a date. It adds the year by itself, and you can obviously add the year too. So we have this thing in place. Now let's see what happens if I type some gibberish and I go to add details. If I click on this, it still adds it. So it is showing me that there is an error, but it still adds this detail here, and I don't want this. So I would have to put a condition here in add detail as well. and this would again be a very similar condition. I would go back here, double click on add details, and here I would come down here and put that condition. Again, let me put another if condition here, and I would say if is date txt doj dot value. If this is true, then I don't want to do anything. But if this is not true, say if this is not true, then I want to exit the sub, and I would say end if. Now let's go back and see if this code works. I come here, I type something here, I select a department, and here I type something which is not a date, and now if I try and add details, it does not add it here because we have something which is not a date. This gets highlighted. Now let me go back and type something which is considered a date here, and now when I click on add details, you can see that it has added it. So we have all the checks in place now. If you don't enter a name, this gets red, you have the focus here. If you don't enter the department, if you don't select the department, it becomes red. And if you don't enter anything here or enter something which is not a date, then this becomes red and you're not able to add anything. Once you have added these elements, you can close it. Okay, so we have not actually added the code for close button. Let's quickly do this. To complete the user form, I would come here, I would open the close button, and here all I need to do is I would say unload me, and this would do it. I go back, I add a user form. If I click on close, it goes away. So now we have the full-fledged user form. You can use this user form to capture details, and we have all the checks in place. You may think that there is a lot of coding that has gone behind it, but it's probably because I had to be very descriptive while I was recording this video. But otherwise, these conditions are quite easy to manage, and if you have followed all the videos so far, you would realize that there is no complex coding that we have used. It's simple things. We have just used a couple of things, which is if condition and putting the value in the cells. There is nothing complex that we have done. So that's it in this video. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you and have a nice day.